The rope fibers bit into her wrists as the firelight licked higher, popping and spitting from the dry kindling piled beneath her feet. Every shadow in the town square twisted against the walls of the saloon and church, stretching long and crooked like judging fingers. The crowd had gathered tight, faces half-lit in the glow, their whispers thick with fear and the ugly thrill of accusation. She stood tall despite the rope around her, hair wild in the desert wind, eyes locked not on the people but on the lone man at the edge of the light. He didn't flinch under her gaze. His hat brim hid most of his face, but the firelight caught his jaw hard, set, and waiting. "Please believe me." Her voice broke across the restless silence, soft but sharp enough to slice through it. "I'm no witch." A hush fell heavier than the night. Someone spat in the dust. Another voice muttered, "She cursed my cattle. I seen it." The sheriff stood stiff, fingers twitching near his holster but not drawing. The man at the edge stepped forward then, slow, deliberate. His boots crunched on the packed earth, every step sounding too loud in that tense stillness. But let's go back to where it all started. It had been a month earlier when Elias Grady first saw her. He was riding back from the far pasture, dusk settling over the plains in soft gold. The town sat low against the horizon, its roofs just catching the last light. Elias wasn't a man who lingered in town longer than needed. He had cattle to tend, fences to mend, and more ghosts than friends. His life had shrunk down to long silences and the occasional nod to a passing neighbor. That evening, though, as he tied his horse at the hitching post outside the mercantile, he noticed her. A stranger, sitting alone on the edge of the well with a small satchel at her feet. She wasn't dressed like the town women, no bonnet, no layers of calico. Her dress was simple, weathered from travel. Sunlight caught in her hair, coppery and wild, and her eyes, though she kept them low, held something restless, like she was waiting for someone who wasn't coming. He stepped inside to fetch flour and coffee, thinking no more of her. But when he came out, she was still there, still waiting, still alone. The townsfolk had begun to notice too. A pair of older women crossed the street to avoid her. A boy tugged his father's sleeve, whispering something that made the man glance at her sharply before spitting in the dirt. Elias watched, jaw tightening. He'd seen that look before, years back when whispers spread faster than truth. Folks in places like this didn't need much to decide someone didn't belong. Days passed and she stayed, renting a room above the boarding house, keeping to herself. But odd things started being said. A sick calf here, a failed crop there. A baby crying through the night. By the end of the week, someone muttered the word witch. Elias tried to ignore it. Not his business, he told himself. But on the third night, while riding home, he saw her again. Out on the edge of town, kneeling in the dirt, hands pressed to the earth as if listening for something beneath it. The moonlight poured silver on her hair, making her look almost otherworldly. He slowed his horse, watching from the shadows. She wasn't chanting or muttering, just still. The wind carried a low hum, like she was singing to the ground itself. Then she stood, brushed the dirt from her dress, and walked back toward town, unaware of his eyes on her. The next morning, a man barged into the saloon shouting that his well had run dry. Another swore his newborn wouldn't stop screaming since that witch came to town. Fear fermented into certainty faster than whiskey turned to fire in the gut. Elias heard the talk at the barbershop at the feed store outside the church. "She's cursed," they said. "God don't suffer her kind." One night, Elias sat alone on his porch, the prairie stretching endless before him. He lit a cigarette, stared at the stars, and told himself it wasn't his fight. But the next morning he saw her again, standing by the church steps, her satchel clutched in both hands, shoulders tight. A boy no older than 10 hurled a rock that caught her in the arm. She didn't cry out, didn't even flinch. She just looked at Elias, just for a second, before lowering her eyes and walking away. Something in his chest twisted. By the week's end, the crowd had gathered and the sheriff, under pressure he couldn't fight, ordered her tied to the stake. Elias stood at the edge of it all, the brim of his hat shadowing eyes that burned with a mix of fury and shame. The fire crackled hungrily. "Please," she said again, voice steady now, clear as the bell that would soon toll at dawn. "I'm no witch." Elias stepped forward, the decision already made in his heart before his boots even touched the firelit ground. This was where the story began to change. Elias didn't remember taking the last few steps toward her. Only the sudden, heavy quiet that fell over the square as he reached her side. The sheriff's hand hovered near his revolver, uncertain. The crowd shifted uneasily, whispers cutting through the night like dry grass in the wind. "Elias?" the sheriff said low, warning in his voice. "Don't." But Elias had already drawn the knife from his belt. The firelight glinted along its worn blade as he reached for the rope binding her wrists. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone shouted, "She cursed your cattle too, Grady. You'll burn with her if you're fool enough." The rope snapped free. The woman, her name still unknown to him, stared up at him with wide eyes, disbelief mingled with something softer, something fragile. Her wrists bore angry red marks, but she didn't move away. "You don't know what you're doing," the sheriff pressed. His voice had lost its authority, the crowd's tension twisting around them both. "She's dangerous." Elias slid the knife back into its sheath. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low but steady. "The only dangerous thing here is the lot of you." He turned to face the crowd, eyes hard beneath the brim of his hat. "You think God's watching this and proud?" The words landed heavy. Some men shifted uncomfortably. Others scowled, fingers twitching toward their rifles. A woman clutched her child closer. The mob was a living thing. Scared, angry, desperate to find a target for everything wrong in their lives. The sheriff stepped forward, trying to salvage control. "This isn't about God. It's about keeping folks safe. You've seen what's been happening. Livestock dying, wells drying up. Been happening long before she showed up." Elias cut in. "You think stringing her up fixes your crops or fills your wells? No, but it sure gives you someone to blame." The crowd didn't like that. Fear turned to anger as quickly as dry brush catching fire. A man near the front spat, "So you'll take her side over your own?" Elias looked down at the woman, at her tired face, her dirt-streaked cheeks. She wasn't pleading anymore, just watching him like she didn't understand why he was doing this. Maybe he didn't either. "I'll take the side that's right," he said finally. The sheriff's jaw tightened. "Then you best be ready to deal with what comes of it." No one stopped Elias when he led her away from the square. Not because they didn't want to, because they didn't yet know what to do. Fear made folks dangerous, but it also made them hesitant, waiting for someone else to make the first move. He didn't look back until they were clear of the crowd. The firelight behind them still flickered against the walls, but no footsteps followed. They walked in silence until they reached his horse. He untied the reins, then glanced at her. "Can you ride?" She hesitated. "I can." He swung into the saddle, then offered her his hand. She took it, light but firm, and he pulled her up behind him. Her grip at his waist was careful, like she didn't quite trust the ground or him, not to vanish beneath her. The ride to his ranch was quiet but not peaceful. Every rustle of grass, every howl of a distant coyote felt too loud, too close. Elias could feel the weight of the town behind them like a storm building just out of sight. At the ranch, he slid off the horse and helped her down. "Ain't much, but you'll be safe here tonight," he said, leading her toward the small cabin. "Tomorrow, we figure out what's next." Inside, he lit the lantern. The warm glow softened the rough-hewn walls, the sparse furniture. She stood near the door, eyes roaming the room like she didn't belong in it. "You got a name?" he asked finally. "Sarah," she said, her voice quiet but sure. He nodded once. "Elias." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she looked at him, and there was a flicker of something, gratitude, but also fear. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. "Maybe not," he said, "but I reckon someone had to." Outside, a lone coyote howled at the moon. Farther in the distance, another answered. And in town, the whispers were already turning to plans. The next morning came with a sharp wind that rattled the windows of the cabin and carried the faint smell of smoke from town. Elias stood on the porch with a tin cup of coffee, watching the plains stretch endless and empty. Sarah sat just inside, near the table, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug, shoulders hunched as if she wanted to disappear. Neither of them said much over breakfast. Silence wasn't strange for Elias. He'd grown used to it, but with her, it felt heavy, expectant, like the air before a storm. He saddled his horse by mid-morning, tying a second set of reins for her. "We'll ride out to the far creek," he said. "Ain't much water there this time of year, but no one'll look for you that way." She nodded, still quiet, her eyes darting toward the horizon as though expecting riders to appear any second. They'd gone no more than a mile when Elias saw it. 2 riders cresting the ridge behind them. Town men, he figured, from the way they sat stiff in their saddles, rifles slung across their backs. "Keep your head down," Elias murmured, slowing his horse. The men caught up quick, dust kicking up around their hooves. "Grady," one of them called. "Sheriff wants a word." Elias shifted in his saddle, keeping his face unreadable. "You can tell him I'll come by when I got time." "This ain't a request," the other man said. His eyes flicked to Sarah, then narrowed. "Town says she's got until sundown to leave. You go against that, you'll answer for it." Elias held their gaze. "She's not hurting anyone." "That what you think?" the first man sneered. "Crops failin', wells dryin'. It all started when she came. If you got sense, you'll step aside and let folks handle it." Elias felt Sarah's grip tighten on the reins. He didn't move. "If the town's set on blaming her, they'll have to come through me first." The riders exchanged a look, half disbelief, half anger. "You'll regret that," one muttered before they turned their horses and rode off, dust trailing behind them. Elias exhaled slow. "It's starting," he said under his breath. They spent the day at the creek, the sun hot on their backs, dragonflies skimming the water's surface. Elias kept glancing toward the horizon, scanning for dust trails. Nothing yet. By late afternoon, they rode back to the ranch. The land felt too quiet, the kind of quiet that warned of trouble. Elias stabled the horse, his jaw set tight. "Get inside," he told Sarah. She stepped close, her eyes searching his. "They won't stop, will they?" "No," he said. "Not till they get what they came for." As night fell, Elias lit a single lantern and set his rifle by the door. In the distance, faint at first, came the sound of hoofbeats. Slow, steady, too many to be a passing rider. Sarah stood behind him, her breath uneven. "They're coming," Elias said quietly, his hand brushing the rifle stock. The hoofbeats grew louder, joined by the occasional barked order. Then the glow of torches appeared at the ridge, a jagged line of fire against the night sky. Sarah whispered, "Please, you should let me go. They'll kill you for me." Elias glanced at her, his face lit faintly by the lantern glow. "Ain't the first time folks wanted me dead for doing what's right." The riders drew closer, the torches flickering in the dark, and Elias felt the familiar cold steel of choice pressing in on him. There wouldn't be any turning back now. The torches stopped just short of the gate, their glow stretching across the dry grass. Elias stepped onto the porch, rifle loose in his hands but not raised. The sheriff rode at the front, his hat pulled low, jaw tight. Behind him, half the town had come. Men clutching rifles, women holding lanterns, faces carved from fear and anger. "Evenin', Elias," the sheriff called, voice low and steady. "You know why we're here." "I do," Elias said. "You hand her over. No one gets hurt." Elias didn't move. "She's done nothing." A murmur rippled through the crowd, sharp with resentment. Someone shouted, "She's cursed us. Our children cry through the night because of her." Sarah stepped out of the doorway then, her face pale in the firelight, her hair loose around her shoulders. Her hands trembled, but her voice didn't. "Please," she said, looking at the sheriff, then at the people who had tied her to the stake. "I've never harmed you, not once. I only ever prayed for your land, your water, your children. The sheriff frowned, uncertain, as if her words pulled at something he didn't want to feel. But a man near the front spat. That's how witches talk. Pretty lies till they've got you. Elias glanced back at Sarah. Show them, he said quietly. She hesitated, then stepped off the porch into the dust. Kneeling, she pressed both palms flat to the ground. The wind stilled, the crowd's whispers faltering as her lips moved silently. Moments passed. Then, faint but clear, came the sound of running water, impossible in this parched land. A trickle first, then a rush, as the old dry creek bed beside the ranch shimmered with fresh flow. Torches tilted, faces lit with confusion and awe. She's praying for you, Elias said, his voice hard. And you'd burn her for it. The crowd wavered. Fear warred with doubt, anger with shame. A young boy tugged his father's coat. Pa, he whispered. She made the water come back. The man didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on Sarah, who still knelt, her fingers curled in the damp soil. Finally, the sheriff dismounted, stepping closer. His hand twitched near his gun but didn't draw. If you stay, they won't forgive you, he said to Elias, his voice almost quiet. They'll come back. Elias didn't look away. Then let em. The sheriff's eyes lingered on Sarah, then dropped. Get her out of town, he said softly, just loud enough for Elias to hear, before they changed their minds. But the crowd wasn't moving, not forward, not back. They just stared at the woman they'd nearly burned, the fresh water gleaming in the moonlight like a wound that wouldn't heal. Sarah stood slowly, her gaze sweeping over them. No anger, no triumph, just sorrow. I never wished you harm, she said, but I'll leave. For your peace, not mine. The sheriff said nothing. Neither did Elias. And yet, in that silence, something shifted. A crack in the wall of hate they'd built around her. They left before dawn, the sky still dark except for the faintest line of pale gold on the horizon. Elias led the horse, Sarah riding behind him, her satchel slung across her shoulder. The land was quiet, save for the creak of leather and the soft thud of hooves on dry earth. Neither spoke much on the ride. Elias kept glancing back at the town shrinking behind them, its rooftops just shadows now. He wondered if the people would wake with guilt or with relief, if they'd ever speak her name again. When the sun finally broke, turning the plains to fire and gold, Sarah reached into her satchel and pulled out a small clay pendant, simple, hand-shaped, no more than a token. For you, she said softly. Elias took it, rough fingers brushing hers. What is it? Protection, she said. Or maybe just a reminder that some kindness is worth the cost. He tied it to the strap of his saddle without a word. By midday, they reached the edge of the prairie where the land fell away toward distant hills. She dismounted slowly, looking out at the open stretch of earth. I'll go on from here, she said. Elias frowned. You sure? She nodded. I can't stay with you. They'll keep coming if I do. He looked at her for a long moment, jaw tight, then handed her his canteen. There's a trail south, follows the river for a good ways. You'll find others there. Sarah took the canteen but didn't move yet. Instead, she stepped closer, eyes holding his. Thank you, Elias, for seeing me when no one else would. He didn't answer, just tipped his hat and stepped back as she began walking, her figure growing smaller against the endless horizon. Elias stood there long after she was gone, the pendant warm in his hand. Behind him, the wind carried the faint sound of water still running in the creek bed by his ranch, a quiet proof of what she'd left behind. Years later, folks would still whisper about the night Elias Grady defied the town. Some called him a fool, others called him brave. But when the drought finally broke, when the wells filled and the fields greened again, no one mentioned the woman they'd once tied to a stake. Only Elias remembered her name, and every dawn before starting his day, he touched the clay pendant and murmured the words he'd never said that night. I believed you.